unload the daydreams. I ordered extra in case things get slow in class.
Might come in handy if this new school is full of boring, useless classes, which it probably will be.
Oh, Sadness. I have a super important job just for you.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Follow me. And there. Perfect. This is the circle of sadness. Your job is to make sure that all the sadness stays inside of it.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek. How are you doing?
I'm feeling joyful. How are you feeling, Ryan?
I'm feeling nervous.
What? You can't feel nervous. You gotta be happy.
Now I'm sad.
What?
Now I am sad because you...
Now you're referencing fun things.
You made me worry about my emotions. Why can't I feel nervous, Bartek? I'm just a small child in this world.
I haven't yet had a movie to make me realize that that's okay.
Well, have I got something for you, Bartek?
What is it?
I've got something over here.
Let me just put this microphone away so I can see.
It's
What
okay.
do
It's
you
called
have
a
for me?
Big Fat Liar.
Whoa!
In which it shows that you can be someone who lies, but also a truth teller. Have you ever... Conflicting things can exist in the same place.
I learnt that in year 11 RE.
RE stands for...
Religious education.
I didn't do that because I went to a public school while you went to a Catholic school. Did you have nuns?
No.
Did you have priests?
No.
You had to think about that one for a second.
I had to, yeah. No, we had brothers because the Catholic school I went to was part of a religious brotherhood.
And Brotherhood makes me think of Assassin's Creed. Right? Ooh.
The third game.
The third game.
Not to be confused with
Brotherhood.
Assassin's Creed 3.
Not to be confused with Final Fantasy VII, which is actually the 18th Final Fantasy game. No. We are not here to talk about video games, sadly. We did do a video game month in which we talked about movies that were adaptations of video games. But
like Assassin's Creed.
That has nothing to do with what we're going to go through today. We are here to present you Pictures Powwow because that is our podcast series in which we talk about a movie that has come recommended. The recommendation cycle goes as such. Week 1, it's Bartek. Second week, it's me. And then the third, it is the listening people. That's you. That's right. You, the listening people, can recommend movies to us. You can suggest movies to us. And we put it on our list. If we can find the movies, we watch them, we discuss them, we talk about them, whether we've seen them before or whether they're completely new to us, whether they're old films or new films. As long as we can obtain them, we watch them.
Yes.
And it is actually the listening people's cycle. It's their time to shine. Someone recommended a movie to us, Bartek. How about you inform us all of what the film is and who recommended it?
So we are doing the 2015 Pixar film. They released 2 films that year, but this is the first one, Inside Out. And this one's recommended by Edgar.
Edgar. J. Edgar Hoover?
No. His last name begins with an A. I think it's like Aviles or something.
Who's this Edgar?
Edgar is one of my stepbrother's best friends.
Thank you, Edgar, for giving us our first Pixar film on the podcast.
Literally in the conversation I had with him where he recommended, it's like, you haven't done any Pixar films? Well, you should do this one.
Nearly 10 years we've been at it, and we have yet to do a Pixar film.
You know, I think like literally 1 month after this recording will be 9 years.
We are close to having gone nearly a decade without a Pixar, but now here we are, and we are talking about Inside Out, that itself came out 9 years ago.
The
Isn't
year we
that
started
crazy?
podcasting,
Isn't that absolutely bonkers that it's been such a long period of time since this film came out? Because recently there was a sequel to the movie that released, and it makes you feel like the passage of time is all weird because it only feels like yesterday that this one was released.
Yeah, when we had the, like Finding Dory, Incredibles 2, and Monsters University, that felt like, oh man, those films came out a million years ago. But with Inside Out, because I was an adult at the time, it feels like it came out not that long ago.
And it was an original film.
Yeah.
Most of the ones, if not all of them, you listed were like weird sequels or prequels or whatever.
Well, I was talking about the sequels, yeah.
Prequel, sequels.
Oh, that's right, yeah, Monsters University was a prequel.
And Finding Dory's a sequel? Prequel? I think it's like an origin of them, and
I thought-
also I don't know. No one's watched it. My wife did. We can ask, but
I think it's a sequel, but it has a flashback to
Sure.
childhood or something.
sure. And Inside Out is the one we're talking about now. Everyone, if you've not watched Inside Out, we recommend that you do. But the basic, simple rundown of it is it's a premise that very much seems like it was factory made for Pixar to do, which is we are following a young girl, someone who is verging on their teenage years, and they have a sudden move from home, and that really shakes up their lives. But we are, in fact, following their inner thoughts, which are personified by these little cutesy, bright, colorful characters. But the main two are joy and sadness, and they have conflicts of interest of how to run this little girl's mind and subconscious, and they get lost from HQ, the place that they run everything from, and they have to make their way back home, and in so doing, learn a little bit about each other and themselves and Riley and about life.
Mm-hmm. And along the way, we discover the inner machinations of how, the human mind works.
The human condition, too. And that's Inside Out, without getting into more depth and more detail. How about you tell us, Bartek, your history and relationship with this film? Have you seen it before? Are you familiar with it?
No, I hadn't seen this one before. I actually saw the other film that came out in 2015, The Good Dinosaur.
No one talks about that one.
Yeah, not really. And I saw
No one likes that one.
I saw it literally for the same reason that I saw Black Panther, which was that my friend Sonny was going to see it with a couple of my other friends, but he had to pull out and he gave me his ticket.
What does he know?
About The Good Dinosaur? Nothing, because I saw it.
But he managed to sidestep 2 movies that would not be for you. He's like, oh, suddenly I can't go to these movies that Bartek won't enjoy. Hey, Bartek.
I actually didn't mind The Good Dinosaur.
Wow.
It was all right. But like you said, I've never really brought it up. That was a few weeks into our podcasting I saw it, I think.
And Inside Out, you missed this.
I missed this one, and it seems to definitely be a big one. A lot of people have made references to it online. This past year and a bit, I've been going to a primary school a lot for work. And in some of the younger year level classrooms, there's like the characters on the walls, as a little guide for like, you have to be in touch with your emotions. You should do a frequent check of like, how are you feeling right now? And it like has the like 4 or 5 emotions and like a list of like, other feelings that you would have if you're feeling joyful. Are you feeling, like energetic, awake, or are you feeling sad? You're feeling tired or hurt, So the imagery is something that is very familiar to me just from that alone.
Yes, it's not true, but this is often held as the end of an era for Pixar because they have gone a certain direction over the last several years that feels a lot more corporate, a lot more Disneyfied, doesn't have that special spark in the same way as it used to. Whenever a Pixar film would come out, you were guaranteed one of the greatest films of the year, whether it was WALL-E or Up or Inside Out.
Yeah.
It was this mature yet beautiful, heartfelt kids
Gorgeous
looking piece for children that can be enjoyed by anyone of any age.
Yeah, I think it was around the time WALL-E came out that the marketing was like, back in 1990 whatever, we had this one meeting where we pitched all these films and this is the last one. And then after that point was kind of where the turn happened. It's like, all the stuff from that one meeting was like, all masterpiece after masterpiece. But then it was started to become, as you said, a bit more corporate, like coming up with new ideas.
Then we got sequels, a lot more, prequels, callbacks, nostalgia. But Inside Out was one of the ones that has been cherished and heralded. And as you said, has been influential. It has gone on, these characters, these designs, and the base premise is something that lingers.
And when I was looking up about this, I didn't actually look up too much about it. So if you have trivia, lay it on me. But obviously this won like best animated feature at the Oscars, but it also won best screenplay.
Interesting, yes, isn't it? And there have been other Pixar films that have made ripples and connections and people enjoy for sure. There have been several over the last couple of years. Soul was one in recent times, and that's something to mention. But there has been a definite change. There's been a lot of crap, a lot of mediocre stuff, as you said. The Good Dinosaur came out in the same year, and no one liked The Good Dinosaur. It felt the most blatantly we make movies for kids type Pixar film since, I don't know, the Cars movies. And even then, the Cars movies are weird. Or people like The Good Dinosaur, that's a Pixar one. You know, like that's where people kind of like scratch their head. And that's been the case where something like Elemental came out within the last year and people look at it and just go, Pixar, what are you doing?
Yeah, I haven't seen one since The Good Dinosaur, so...
Evidently.
Yeah. You've seen Toy Story 4, I haven't.
I have. It's
and
fine.
I know you champion it a little bit.
I like it. It has some good elements, but it doesn't need to exist, if that makes you feel better. But Inside Out, I saw this relatively close to its release. I didn't see it in the cinema, but I've watched it. I've seen it the one time, but I remember it very vividly. It's a film with a very neat structure to it, a very familiar beat to it. You have the odd couple butting heads, but you have the one that's clearly in the wrong. They're on almost like a road trip in their own way, going through a mysterious land, and it's commenting upon the human psyche, the human condition. And we learn stuff about Riley through learning more about these emotions. And I enjoyed it when it came out. I definitely thought if I was in the target demographic, this would really be one of the greats for me.
I had that thought when I was watching it too. Like, if I was younger, I wonder if I would love this more. Yeah.
Do you have a Pixar film that you particularly... How do you feel about Pixar in general? Did you grow up with them? Are you a big fan of them? Do you have ones you like in particular?
Oh, like you said before, like when a new Pixar film would come out, it would just be the best thing ever. I think the only classic one I haven't seen is Cars 1. I know
really?
and I know we have a DVD of it at home. It's actually from Poland, so it's not Cars, it's Auta.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but the Toy Story, the first two Toy Stories, like I was obsessed with those when I was a kid. I've told you the Polish dub of Toy Story was one of my childhood VHSs. All the ones that came out after that, really loved. Finding Nemo I feel like I've seen that a million times in that 1 year it came out.
Same.
Yeah, they've always just been so fun, and they look so great. You know, they were the ones championing 3D. Now 3D's all over the place kind of thing. So going into this, you know, I had the mixed emotions of like, oh yeah, it's one of the newer ones, and you know, I might have grown out of this kind of thing, but it is Pixar, and it is, you know, one of the ones that people do actually seem to like from their, I guess, latter half of their timeline. So maybe it'll be a good one. And I did actually like it quite a bit. Again, didn't love it, but and I've mentioned before on the podcast, like when we covered A Dangerous Method, that I am interested in psychology. And there's a lot of neat things in this that kind of relate to that, where it's, you know, introducing things in the mind that are significant to a personality and representing them in a childish and whimsical way. And I think that was really geniusly handled, especially in like the first 10 minutes where you're being introduced to this world from zero and you're introducing these concepts and they're all lining up.
Establishing the rules.
Yeah.
So when we subvert them or break them or change them, we have a frame of reference. Other than, well, I feel emotions. And it's even got nice little bits of foreshadowing of when we see other people's emotional landscapes and how theirs looks in comparison to how Riley's looks. So, again, spoiler, when we get to the end and they make a big console where everyone has a go, we already saw that in the movie with the parents, where the parents' emotions all have a big console where they all operate at the same time.
It wasn't just one at a time.
It wasn't one at a time, even though you could say there was a leader emotion. There was still the visual presentation that pays off in the end in a big way, but you weren't thinking or noticing it when you were watching the movie as it went along. But if you look back or if you revisit it, it adds up.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It pays off.
I dare say I didn't notice it until 10 seconds ago.
There's little touches like that, or how the dad's primary emotion is anger, the mum's primary emotion is sadness. Those are things. Or the fact that Joy is I do believe, the only character with a color that is with like a color outside of their own. So, disgust is all green, red, anger is all red, but sadness is all blue. But Joy is yellow and blue because her hair is blue.
And she has a bluish glow, I think.
And yeah, she has a glow, and people often mention, it's like, well, that's kind of like how joy and sadness, they have a connection, that they're interlinked. And it's not referenced or touched upon in the movie, but that's the beauty of visual language and those little flourishes that tie into themes and messages that when you think back on it just on a purely aesthetic level, you can make those connections. That's why whenever we've covered animated movies, we talk about that, about what is the design purposes, like why are the characters illustrated in the way that they are? What's the meaning of that? Because there is usually a meaning to that. I think about when we discuss things like Tokyo Godfathers or Ghost in the Shell, for instance, we'd spend time talking about, like, why are the characters looking this way? What does that represent? What does that mean? How does this tie into the theme or message of the movie, other than this would be a cool design or a cute design?
Yeah.
Because rarely in movies is it just as simple as that for the majority of the time.
This film goes to like a very factorial distance to, color code so many things. You got the 5 emotions, they've all got their primary color.
Yeah.
And you see these orbs throughout the film that represents like, oh, this is a memory that predominantly has this feeling attached to it. And you have so many scenes where you don't know what the memories are, but you just see all of these orbs, and you can see like, oh, there's mostly this color. So that means that generally these all happened around like a happy time. Like at the beginning parts of the film, they're making a lot of very joyful memories. So there's like all of these yellow orbs. There's like one green one here. She didn't like the broccoli. There's a red one here. She complained about having to eat the broccoli, but it's all surrounded by all these yellow. And then when things start to go wrong, like the first day of school, it's like, look at all this, purple and green. I remember there was a lot of green in some scenes, and it was just like, it's showing you the evolution of like what the character that they're inside is going through.
The design of the characters too are very specific. When we're in the real world, it's the real world. People look like people. The dad has stubble, the mum has hair in her face, Riley's just a kid. But when we're in her mind, everything is much more abstract, but with unity to it as well. Like it all feels the same. And then, so when we meet an imaginary friend, he's very different, to the point in which they ask, what are you supposed to be? Because they all make sense. Like, Joy is this bright, colorful thing that is based on like a star, I think was the idea for her. And then, sadness is this rounded, based on a teardrop aesthetic. Green, ironically, disgust is based on a broccoli. That's very funny. The fearful one, nerve, is based on like a raw nerve. So that's why he's kind of jagged. And then you have the red one where anger.
He's like a volcano.
He's like a brick.
Yeah.
That's what they described as just so rock solid. And it all lines up. So when we get further into the bowels of Riley's mind and we meet, other little figures, you're like, oh, these look like little brain cells. The ones that do the odd job dirty work. Yeah. They look like brain cells, or they look like this. But then when you meet, dreamscape characters, or characters of the subconscious, or characters like Bing Bong, they're different looking, and it's like, oh, that's right, imagination. That exists, and that's very delightful. So what do you want to touch upon? What do you want to discuss about Inside Out?
So one of the big things that the film looks at is, and you've already mentioned it, the sort of emotion that's the primary one that a character is associated with. So our main character, the character that this whole revolves around, Riley, her lead emotion is joy, and she's therefore our main character. And that beginning chunk of the film really highlights how, even though they're all doing their job, it's like, oh, now it's a time to feel anger, now it's a time to feel disgust, yada yada. it always comes back around to Joy, like, fixing things, and it really plays into the whole, notion we have in life, like, let's try to be upbeat, and in the beginning parts of that film, you kind of feel that. It's like, oh, well, yeah, now, Joy, go and fix this situation. It's like, if you're doing Joy, you're fixing it, and I really felt that notion early on. And Joy had that line about, like, yeah, we don't really know what the purpose of sadness is. And because, we're with Joy on this journey, at least for myself, like, I was wondering myself, like, oh yeah, what kind of purpose does she have? And the film very cleverly, when the two of them are out on their adventure, answers that question in a really effective way.
They also, at the beginning, too, set up a level of sympathy for Sadness, because Sadness herself isn't a mean-spirited character. She's trying to do the right thing. She's trying to participate, but she's exiled and isolated. She's put in a circle and told not to step out of it. And although Joy is this bubbly, over-the-top character, you can sense, if you're a keen-eyed viewer, and very much if you're an adult too, but it pays off of Joy is controlling and overcompensating and dictating too much and not letting everyone participate. So yes, what does Sadness serve? Well, we won't know because Joy won't let Sadness in. And what is so brilliant about the movie is the real world story of Riley out and about, and the internal story, and how the internal story gives us emotional context and development to the outside story. So when the mother is saying to Riley that, oh, it's been so good that you've reacted really well to this experience, and I need you to keep being happy for your dad. If you saw that scene on its own without all of the inside of the character's mind stuff, you would go, well, that's just a classic scene in which, the parent is checking in, and it's a nice scene. But we know, because of what's happening inside of Riley's mind, that this is the reinforcement of positivity and joy that Riley has within her. Her mother is the external force that's making her repress her sadness, like is teaching her that you have to repress your sadness right now, which is counterintuitive to the message of the movie. And that's brilliant. Like, it really works nicely. It's not as if Joy, the character, in her mind is just this way from nothing. You see in Riley's real life, just like how it is in the real world, people influence your emotional states.
Yeah.
And that's the real delicate balancing act of this movie, because there's a version of this in which you could look at it and say, well, Riley's not actually a person. She's just this being, like, she's just this automaton operated by people in a room. But the movie makes sure to find this ill-defined but magical sweet spot of having it both ways, of like this you cake and eat it too type
With
attitude.
My adult brain on while watching this was like, I could see this kind of falling apart if they make her, simply the slave of these emotions.
That's right. And yeah, it's really well done. I love the voice cast. They're very good. Amy Poehler is back, baby. We've had her a couple of times recently. Obviously, in the Tenacious D movie, she was, I keep bringing it up, she was the waitress at the bar with the black eye. Now here she is as Bubbly Joy. Oh, she's great as this role. This is a fantastic example of a movie that understands that you get voice actors and you can get, non-voice actors to work together really well, because someone like Amy Poehler, for instance, or Kyle MacLachlan is in this movie too. They're not you don't register them as voice actors, but you get the right people for the right role and get them in their spots and they just nail it. Like, there's been this discussion, and we've seen it over and over again, of these big Hollywood movies, your Disney films, stunt casting of like, well, if I get a celebrity to do the voice, well, then it does all of the work. And it's like, well, does it? Does it always? And sometimes the answer is yes. Like, Amy Poehler is known as a comedic actress, primarily SNL and stuff, and yet she has to pull off some real gravitas, some real drama in this movie that, we don't know too much from her, Parks and Rec show, it doesn't have this type of thing in it, or SNL doesn't allow this, but she's not like a big voice actress, but they got her for this movie, and you're like, who else would play this role? She's great.
Yeah. And the animation especially complements it for whenever they're doing like a comedic thing. Like there's a couple of moments where, one in particular that I can think of where she is kind of having like a conversation with herself as if she's two people, and it's doing, the character's doing the thing where like they're on the right side of the frame as one of them, the left side is the other, and like you can see the tone changes in time with the character animation.
Yes, and then you pair her with the actress who plays Sadness, who was who's a character actress, TV person, was in the American version of The Office as, Phyllis, like the office lady with the big glasses and all of that, and what a great voice for Sadness. You're like, oh, that sounds exactly how you imagine this character to be. And then you get like, one or two other people. I think Pixar, for the most part, has always found a good use of well-known, established A-grade Hollywood actors to do voice work in their things. Like Tom Hanks is Woody. Like I can't imagine anyone else doing it, It's
other than Jim Hanks.
Well, but that's still, and even then, it's just, he sounds like he's just Tom. So, but, well, how do you feel about that? Because they always get people like John Goodman or,
I guess,
Ellen DeGeneres.
As a kid, that factor wasn't really a thing for me, but thinking back on it, I don't think there's ever really been one in the ones that I've seen where it's like, oh yeah, they just got that person for, the cred. I think more about like the commercial, the trailers for the DreamWorks films where, at the very end, it's like this actor, this actor, this actor.
Will Smith as a fish.
Yeah, Shark Tale's a big one for that one.
That's the prime example I can think of just like, okay.
Yeah, Will Smith, Jack Black, Ziggy Marley, Christina Aguilera.
Martin Scorsese. They always do a fine job. Did you love that Carl McLaughlin was the dad?
No, I love Carl McLaughlin. Get him in there.
Did you notice it was him?
Not by the voice, but I saw his name in the credits.
Oh, brilliant. I was like, oh, that's Kyle. I can hear the voice. I can hear it all
We've
already.
had him on the podcast before.
We've had him a few times. But what else is there to talk about with Inside Out? What do you want to get into?
I guess this wasn't so much a thing that the film was doing, but I found myself going into it a sort of like gamey aspect, because the big conflict of this film is that, you got the headquarters where the five emotions work and they need to work together to, properly have this person be a person. And the conflict is that two of them, two very important ones, Joy and Sadness, are no longer there. So the character in the real world can only function either neutrally, anger, disgust, or fear. And I found myself in a lot of the situations wondering like, oh, okay, for this situation, which of these three non-ideal emotions would be able to handle it best? So it got the imagination going for me, and I really found that to be, something that I more intrinsically brought to the experience.
And that anger was the one that primarily took over. Well, it says something. It says something about how willing we are to get to draw to anger. But also fear took over a lot too. I was noticing that on the watch through, especially in the night, in the dreams. Fear is the one that's overlooking her mind.
Well, it's his shift, yeah.
And I like, but it's not, exactly. But I think that, again, it draws something, it says something. And I liked how he was just not at all, into the dreams. He's like, I've seen this one. Oh, this plot again. Oh, okay, we're going to do this bad actor.
He was being a real heckler, if you know what I mean.
I do. Did you note down which of the emotions was played by an actor who was in the documentary Heckler that we covered?
Oh, was it anger?
Anger is played by Lewis Black, who is in the documentary Heckler that we covered, and he was the one that was all about, like, critics back in the day used to have humility. They used to be humble. And now here he is in a critically acclaimed movie, but I'm sure he really didn't care about what the critics had to say about this one. There was a fun trivia fact about how he got offered the job from Pixar, and Pixar were like, well, in case you don't know who we are, here's like a catalog of our movies. They gave him a bunch of movies, and he had this statement of like, It's very amusing that they thought I didn't know who they were. Either they're insane or they think I'm a recluse. Like, it's Pixar.
Or maybe they're being comedians.
Yeah, they're real funny. Yeah, they're real funny. But again, we can't criticize them.
He didn't get the joke, but that's just me heckling.
That's just you heckling them. Yes, I thought it was interesting too of seeing how Riley was portrayed when she was lacking some of the emotions, and just there's this concept of these different islands that they have, and that they were starting to die and fall into the pit that wipes out the memories of them entirely, and that one by one they went away because she had these interactions, like with her friend, and how she talked to her friend on the computer, and her friends moved on, it seems, but still trying to be nice, and she just goes to anger immediately. It's like, fuck that, closes the laptop, I need to get out of here, and just wipes that one, or the hockey, for instance, in which she's entering into this with no confidence because she's driven by disgust, fear, and anger. So it's this self-sabotaging thing, and the movie's getting to that point in which when you remove your joy and your sadness, what do you become? But it's also about how we need to have all of these in harmony with one another. The big message of the movie, brilliantly represented with the different memories and orbs, is that we can have everything be tinged by multiple types of emotions, not just one.
Mm-hmm.
Like you and I, for instance, can have memories of events of this podcast that can be tinged by more than just happiness. It can be happy and sad, and happy and annoyed, fearful, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, when Luke didn't let me speak.
When Luke wouldn't let you speak. That motherfucker.
Yeah. Well, I did tell him, I used my words to tell him that he should, quiet down and let me speak for a second.
You said it very gentlemanly,
yes,
of course.
Ryan and editing, show us.
You have to remind me of what episode that was.
Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo.
Seen that they were
He's
doing...
really shit at his job.
Shut the fuck up and let me speak!
Sorry, that was really loud.
Never mind. Let's just watch the movie.
Did you have a favorite section of the movie? Was there something that connected with you, or you thought was really well done?
Again, that first chunk of the film where we're being introduced to everything, it was just really effectively done. I keep going back to it. There were times where, later on when they're outside of HQ and they're going through all these things where, and again, this is probably adult brain coming into it. I was like, I'm not really seeing how this kind of connects to everything. It felt a lot more tighter earlier on when we were just in the HQ.
Okay, interesting. I like the second half. I like Bing Bong. I think he's a great character.
He was a lot of fun, yeah.
He's very fun, and he's a lot more mature than either of them, which is great.
His little moment with sadness was a really good moment for the sadness character, yeah.
For the film in general.
Yeah.
I liked that if you look at him, his outfit, he's designed like he's a hobo because he's been forgotten in a weird way, and he's just scraping by and trying to collect all of these memories for himself because they will help him.
Yeah, his introduction goes into a lot of detail about who this character is, and it's really effective, where he's like, what even are you? And he's like, well, this, and this was really popular at the time, so this.
One of my favorite gags was when he was like, this is Cloud Town. And he's like ripping up the wall from the house, and then the guy came out and he was like, hey, what are you doing? And then he just blew the guy away. And then later in the movie, we came back to Cloud Town, and the wife is reporting it to the police. I thought that was brilliant. I completely forgot about it, because when that happened, I was like, oh, he just murdered that guy. And then the movies later on, like, he just murdered that guy. And then they murder her too, so it's fine. There's a lot of murdering of things in this, like the imaginary boyfriends. It's like, all right, guys, you're willing to die for her, right? Awesome.
I like those characters. They felt the most anime thing in the film.
The anime of the movie.
I'll die for Riley.
I'll die for Riley. I liked Bing Bong a lot. He's fun, he's noble, he's got more depth. A piece of brilliant animation, of course, was when they were having to cross into the imagination land. They were taking the shortcut. And there's the 4 different stages that happen in between when it was activated. I thought that was when the film really showed off what Pixar is good at, which is blending different styles of animation into what it needs.
And a funny way to represent like de-evolution of animation, where it's like, oh, now they're very like polygonal, and now they're two-dimensional, now they're one-dimensional, and even though one-dimensional is like a step away from death, that's also where they have the opportunity to, save themselves, and especially, when they do become one-dimensional, and when it becomes two-dimensional, and like the exit, which was in the distance, is now just like within reach. That felt very Super Paper Mario.
It felt very Looney Tunes to me as well. That feels like something that would happen in a Looney Tunes bit.
That's the whole big thing in Super Paper Mario, where you have the button that changes you from 3D to 2D, and you do get like benefits like that. It's like, oh, now this background is like a platform you can jump on.
Pixar is a well-beloved establishment, and we've never covered their films. Why? We've gone through half our run basically now recommending movies on our own. When we first started, Pixar would never be on the table because we did unappreciated movies, while their movies were always appreciated. If anything, any Pixar movie we could have picked would have been like Cars 2 or something. But
or The Good Dinosaur.
Or The Good Dinosaur. But why has Pixar never come up in our recommendations? We've talked about Pixar movies. But we've never actually talked about one. Why?
I mean, I guess it's similar to, and I've had this conversation with another person about when they brought up Tarantino. Like, you've never done a Tarantino film. At that point, we hadn't done Jackie Brown yet, and it just kind of felt like, oh well, it's a bit more obvious, I guess. Like, oh yes, Pixar films are great, but which one would we want to highlight, kind of thing.
I feel it's a bit different in comparison when it's a whole like production or studio brand and a director. And a director with very minimal amount of work too. Like Tarantino hasn't even done like 10 films, right?
True.
But Pixar, they're an establishment, they're a brand. We've done, but at the same time, we haven't really done Ghibli movies. We did Grave of the Fireflies, and that's like a Ghibli-esque film. Like there's a whole fucking production nightmare about where the licensing of that movie lives. But we have done like big movies like your Ghost in the Shells, or we've done Perfect Blue and pretty much all of his filmography at this point, or at least a good portion of it on the pod.
We're missing one film,
We'll have to finish it off. But I guess the reason is it's just never occurred to me to do it on the podcast. Maybe because they're films I like to just watch. You know what I mean? Where sometimes there's films where you're like, I love to talk about them and analyze them and discuss them as well as watch them. And even beyond the podcast, they're just films that, I love to talk about, I love to get into. But say with a Toy Story. Toy Story are my favorite. The Toy Story films are my favorite Pixar movies, by far.
Yeah.
I like WALL-E a lot. But, Toy Story, that one's my favorite. I love Toy Story 2. It's probably a better movie, but I like Toy Story 1. I just like to watch them. I don't get into talking about them too much, and if I do, I just love like talking about like the random things that happen in them, like the comedic bits, like give me a hand and throws a whole arm, all of that silly stuff. But it's just never occurred to me to give us a Pixar movie, and I think talking about Inside Out is kind of like a reasoning why that it's like they're hard to discuss because the brilliance of them are just so on the page at this point. And I think that's something to mention, though. Pixar, along with many others, but Pixar have really given way to a general audience's love of animated films. 3D animated films particularly. But I feel like, the shift of, well, this is just for kids, to now this is Academy Award nominee worthy stuff and award-winning stuff. Disney is very much, one of the big guys of that, of changing the image of, how we should look at animated films in general, whether it's back in the day with Fantasia or today where you get, something like Zootopias or whatever, where it's like we can really make something important. And I think Pixar is one of the big pillars of that, especially in Western animation, of when you get that bullshit critique of like, oh, well, who cares? It's just for kids. It's like, well, you just show the picture of the lamp from Pixar, and that says, like, that image basically like defeats a lot of that viewpoint.
I'm just imagining, like, you know, the shot at the end of that where the lamp looks at the viewer. Just like cut to that, like, just look.
That
Who
look.
cares?
But what are your opinions on that? Because I do feel like within our lifetime, we've definitely seen the grander appreciation for animation grow and grow and grow, where now they have their own separate segment in the Academy Awards. But that's also, like we've talked about, like, but is that a backhanded thing? Like, well, we have to leave the best picture for, you know, the real movies. But how?
Yeah, has there definitely not been any animated films this century that have been nominated for Best Picture?
I can't recall if there have or hasn't been. I have to double check.
Yeah, we should double check. But yeah, definitely, because Beauty and the Beast is the one that really kind of cemented that, right? Because it was nominated for Best Picture.
It was the first one, I'm pretty sure, and it worried the industry. It's like, well, we can do that? It's like, why can't you?
And then I know the year that Shrek and Jimmy Neutron came out, that's when they made the Best Animated thing. Yeah, it's always been kind of a double-edged sword, especially in the Western side of things, where, like you said, so many of them fall back on, like, it's just for kids. Well, look at the credits of any animated film and see how many minutes they go for, how many people work on them, how many people who are adults clearly saw something in this project. But even for the trends of of animated films themselves, you know, Pixar, I think, have done such a phenomenal job, and DreamWorks as well, that so many animated films have started to become three-dimensional. And it kind of has led a lot of us into the trap of like, oh, well, 2D animation is now dead. Everyone wants 3D. And I think when I was younger, I think I kind of did fall into that trap a little bit. But then, you know, growing up, seeing, oh, no, there's still very good things in 2D.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good beginning. But then maybe there's some consequences when you put all the eggs into that basket.
What I love about Pixar, and what I love about, say, Ghibli as well, that comes to my mind, is the respect that comes from them. When you're a kid, there's, like, I've talked about this on the podcast, as have you. When you watch some kid stuff, there's this condescending nature to it of like, well, it's just for babies, who cares? And as a kid, you can feel that sometimes, you know? You want films that go for concepts and ideas that are a little bit beyond you. You want to be imbued with something rather than always just having a bright, colorful image that flashes in front of you and it's just mindless. When you watch the beginning of Finding Nemo, for instance, when you're a kid, it hits. Because you, as a kid, understand loss and grief, but it's something that isn't maybe talked about all the time in your everyday life. And if it's presented to you in a meaningful way in a movie, something like Up will always remain in your life because it was a film that addressed something that isn't maybe directly addressed in your life, but you know it's there and you have had it maybe, or you're aware that it will come for you one day, these parts of life. And Inside Out does this with emotions where, you know, you're a little kid and you're thinking, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry. I'm those things. But as you get older, or as you become more perceptive, those blur together, and that maybe it's not as black and white. Maybe it's not as binary. And Inside Out is a film that respects its audience, no matter the age, that we can teach you or make you understand that you are complex. As an adult watching this, I can say, well, if I was younger, this would be one of my favorite Pixar movies, but as an adult watching this, I still appreciate and comprehend and even learn and grow from what the movie is trying to tell us, trying to show us. And it makes you, as an adult, nostalgic as well, looking back on your youth and thinking, was I like this when I was younger? Did I go through a journey like this? What was my version of this, per se?
What are your core memories, Ryan?
What are my core memories? What was my journey of self-discovery like? And how did I get to this point? Reflection. It all comes from a baseline of respect. That's what I love about, Pixar movies is they have these brilliant, like, kid concepts. Like, as a kid, you would think, oh, when I'm away, my toys play on their own.
They do, yeah.
That's a brilliant idea, but that's where they don't just stop there. Pixar goes further and further and further. And think back. Most Pixar protagonists are the same. They're the leader of a society or a culture that has become too overconfident in their abilities.
Mm-hmm.
An outsider comes along and shakes up the status quo, and they need to accept that outsider is valuable too, and they need to understand that everything shouldn't be ruled by one way of life. It should be ruled by many. That's Woody in Toy Story. He's top dog. That's it in Finding Nemo as well, right? Where he's like an old, he's a curmudgeon-y guy, and he gets teamed up with this, aloof, weird character, and he needs to realize he has to open up, and like it's very much a lot of the things
partway into this film, like I wasn't seeing that because Sadness is so different to Buzz Lightyear, but the main duo, it's like, oh, they're doing the same thing kind of thing.
They often do it, but again, it doesn't matter if it's a repetition as long as it actually means something. Like you said, we did Jackie Brown for Tarantino, but it's like, well, what can you say about Tarantino? And if you watch enough of his films, you get enough of the same core concepts and ideas, but they're changed and shaped in different ways where, if you're a fan of his work, you can appreciate how Jackie Brown is very different to Kill Bill and how Kill Bill is very different to Inglourious Bastards, and yet there's a lot of recurring patterns and similarities and traits. And that goes the same for, Pixar, where you hear here's the Pixar formula for a lot of things, but, it's done in this way and it's focusing on this thing and it's relating to this part of the child development, say. And that's why they remain with us. Like, when we finished school, Toy Story 3 came out. We were the same age as Andy, basically. And it was a film that was saying we have to say goodbye to our toys. And we have to embrace change and growing up and moving on. And it meant something to people our age, maybe way more than, quote unquote, the demographic the movie was made for, which was 7-year-olds. But we grew up with those movies. And Inside Out, if you showed this to, a kid who's 5 years old, they would maybe have a bigger reaction than you and I, but we have bigger reactions to it in different ways that maybe a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old does not yet comprehend.
Yeah, that climactic scene where the parents and Riley got together and she apologized, I'm sorry for, not feeling happy. That one really got to me.
I did not have an imaginary friend that I'm aware of. Did you ever have an imaginary friend?
I think we've had this conversation before, but yeah, no, I haven't. I remember I was aware of the concept, and I think I tried to have one because that just seemed like a thing that people did, but obviously it's not really a thing you can force.
And Bing Bong's sacrifice was very touching. Richard Kind is a great actor. He's got such a pleasant voice. You want to like him just from hearing that voice. And so when he died, when Bing Bong exits the movie and he helps Joy get up top and do what she needs to do and, take her to the moon and all of that, that chokes me up a little bit. It's not just, oh, this character is giving up their existence for another, but it's that, I don't know how you feel about when you're confronted by the idea that so many precious moments or just even inane moments will slip from your memory because the brain can only comprehend and retain so much.
Mm-hmm.
But when, confronted with that idea, I can find it very challenging. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Because that's a part of this movie too. Like a whole swath of this movie is just being like, no, that's important. We need to keep that. And just being like, nope, it's garbage. Throw it in the trash. Boom, gone. We need to now retain this bubblegum song or whatever it is. But like, how do you feel about that idea of just life itself, of just your memory, your mind can only have so much?
It's a concept I think about a fair bit. And, you kind of have to fall into or you have to fall out of the trapping of thinking that it's binary. It's like, when did I go from the point of I remember this to when I don't remember this? And you have to realize it's a gradual process. And, there might not be the one moment where it's like, oh, that's the moment where I forgot this thing. It's very complex.
And it's something that art can explore forever and in different ways. Weirdly enough, I already mentioned the director, but when I was watching Inside Out, you know what movie kept popping into my mind? Paprika. I kept thinking of Paprika.
Well, that one's a very psychological one as well. It's about dreams. This one acknowledges dreams as well.
And about how you can shape memories and personalities by removing and altering and changing.
That was another scene I really liked in this, yeah, where she had her first day of school, then when she went to bed that night, she had a dream where all of the stimuli from that day and even prior, like the broccoli pizza and stuff, all showed up in this very abstract way.
That was well done. And the idea that, oh no, we've changed a core memory and it's stuck that way forever, and that was like the threat of the movie, and then the ending is knowing that that isn't how life works. Sadness does not forever stain a memory forever. Like, you can have tinges of other things within it. You may think, well, that time that thing happened in my life will forever be sad in my mind. Maybe 30 years later, you look back on it and you have a new frame of reference for it. That is not just sadness.
That memory will be your strength. You know what's kind of funny, that is something that I read not too long ago that kind of resonated with that. End of last year, so it's almost been a year, I read through the manga Fist of the North Star. Iconic, fighting over the top kind of thing. And the main character's like core strength in the end came from sadness, where his whole martial arts style, they've got the ultimate technique, the Muso Tensei, and the only way for you to be able to unlock this ultimate ability is to understand the true meaning of sadness. And it's because in the climax of the first half, he reflects on all of the friends and enemies that he met along the way and lost, and their memories, made him understand true sadness, and he was able to beat the final boss because he understood true sadness.
I feel like Japanese animation and mangas understand this concept very much. It often recurs. When you were talking about that, I was thinking, obviously, of Evangelion as well, in which that's a series and a franchise that knows this idea very, very intimately as well, and goes into very harsh directions with it. But this is what I love about media. We can have these type of conversations spawn from a movie that you and I maybe didn't, overwhelmingly love in the way that other people do, or people of certain age brackets do, but it touched us in a way, and it makes us think about things within our lives, or the type of art we've consumed over the years that maybe have connected with us about these basic ideas. And I always value those things as well. I always value when you watch something or you read something or other, and it makes you think back on moments of your life, or, oh, this other book I read was getting at this idea, and now I have even a greater appreciation for what that one was doing, and how this one's doing it in its own way. Like, this is the great stuff about art, and Pixar's really great at this in general. I find, like, whenever I go back and revisit something like this, for instance, for my birthday, which was only a little while ago, my wife got me the first season of Heroes because I want to rewatch the first and only season of Heroes. And you know what was one of the first things that popped into my mind about that series? I thought about The Incredibles. Because The Incredibles, Heroes, and Unbreakable, all around the similar period of time in which superhero media and comic book media was not popular.
That was all the same decade, right? 2000s?
Early to mid 2000s. And they're all around that same time where the comic book, where we are now, had not started. And these were unique, interesting takes on the idea that, quote unquote, had a mature view of it, or like an off the beaten path view of it. And they were lauded and celebrated for that. And it was like, it made me think about, like, those were three very different ways of doing it, but they all come in at the same idea, though. Like Unbreakable and The Incredibles and Heroes are all different, and yet when you boil it down to their base elements, they're very similar. Like, here's these persons or these productions' views of what it can be to be a superhero in the modern age, or, you know, in the modern media landscape age, because The Incredibles is set in the past, weirdly. Never forget it's set in the 60s.
Yeah, it is.
But another one that's like, oh, that's a period piece. That's right.
We were talking about Thunderpants before we started recording.
Thunderpants, which is also set in the same period, by the way. Isn't that crazy?
Different country.
Well, you know.
Well, sorry, they go to NASA at the end of Thunderpants, so...
Yep, and they go, yep, so take it back. Thank
you.
do,
yeah.
Thank you. They went to space.
You're welcome. You're welcome for taking it back.
Is there anything else you want to say or mention or go over with Inside Out?
Not as much, but earlier you brought up Ghibli, and I saw that in the credits, the executive producer was John Lasseter, who I think is the guy that founded Pixar, or one of the creators. And I know that there was a trivia point just about him and Pixar in general, about how he went to Japan in the 80s or something like that, and he saw a clip from Miyazaki's Castle of Cagliostro, and he showed that to his wife, and, you know, that kind of shows you the connection that, you know, we brought up Ghibli as being like a huge thing for animation, like the Japanese counterpart to Pixar, and you can see that there's like a sort of connecting line there.
There's always a back and forth with the animation industry. As we know, we have some Disney influences the Japanese, like with Tezuka.
Yeah, like
where he loved Disney.
Yeah, like
he loved Disney.
The anime art style was basically based on Disney animations from the mid 20th century.
Oh, I was reading about this. You know how this comes back to Ghibli, but you know how in anime they're so obsessed with food, like making it look gorgeous. You know where a lot of that stems from? It's from a Western piece of animation. So a lot of it stems from Japanese animators and people looking at how gorgeous the food was in Tom and Jerry cartoons.
Okay.
In Tom and Jerry cartoons, they made steaks look fucking amazing. They made eggs look amazing. They made, chickens look amazing. And a lot of Japanese animators, like Ghibli people, often credit, like, we would see that and be like, whoa, what's going on there? Like, I read a piece where it was just like, whenever, you would watch an American cartoon like a Tom and Jerry thing, they would open the refrigerator and we would look inside and be like, well, look at that.
Wow, not even a Disney thing, but Warner Brothers.
Yeah, so it all, comes back around, like these things influence one another. I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, but the big thing that people joke about with Inside Out is it's basically a Pixar version of a sitcom called Herman's Head. I'm not too sure if you're aware of Herman's Head.
I'm not really aware of it, but I did read that it was that this was compared to that. Yeah,
sitcom in which a guy, modern guy, 90s guy, gets around and we go inside of his head and there's people inside of his head who are the primary emotions and they're basically these emotions. But one of them's like sloth, like one of them's slob. And it was a very interesting show, very funny show. Hard to watch because it's one of those where it's like, where is it? Where did it go? I can't watch it. But Inside Out, I'm glad we watched this. I'm glad that this was the recommendation. Was there any Pixar movie that you thought you would recommend on this podcast? If there was ever any of them, was there one in particular in your mind or that's still in your mind that you would want to bring to the table? Because when we got this, I was like, oh, it's never really occurred to me to bring a Pixar movie to the podcast. It never has, but has there been any for you?
I guess if it would have been anything, it might have either been maybe one of the first two Toy Stories just because they were so important when I was young. Or maybe one of the ones that I haven't seen as much, but like maybe WALL-E. I think I've seen WALL-E like once and a half.
Yeah, so good. I would have brought Monsters, Inc.
That is a good one too.
It's a good one, but it's one I haven't watched too often. It's in my catalog. It's one of the lesser ones, but it's still a great one.
Yeah,
like,
I watched it a fair bit.
I know people who ride or die for Monsters Inc. And I'm one of the ones who's like, Monsters Inc. wasn't like I've liked Finding Nemo more. I like this more. I like this more. And then it's like, what about Monsters Inc? I'm like, I love Monsters Inc. It's great, but you know what I mean? Like, was spoiled. And then Cars. I would also recommend Cars because
what?
it's such a fucking anomaly.
I don't
know
yeah.
what to make of Cars.
I think we should recommend Cars just because it's, like I said, the only one from like that first chunk that I haven't seen.
And it's got your boy, Owen Wilson.
It's got Larry the Cable Guy. I thought you meant.
No, your boy. You love Owen Wilson.
I love Owen Wilson.
Zoolander. We love Zoolander, and Owen's great.
And Zoolander
Hansel,
too.
and he's just so Owen Wilson. It's Starsky and Hutch himself, Owen Wilson.
Well, he's Hutch.
Yes, we didn't even talk about Ratatouille. That's another one. That's another great Pixar one.
That one I've literally only seen once in the cinema.
I've seen it a couple of times. Rachel loves Ratatouille. That's probably one of her go-tos.
I remember,
my wife's one of her go-tos. We have it on physical media.
I remember when we left the cinema, I told my dad, "Oh man, I think I like that more than Finding Nemo."
Wow, but
I had seen Finding Nemo a million times by that point, so probably kind of wore thin.
My last question: neither of us have seen Inside Out 2. I haven't heard anything about it. I know it came out. I know it's got good ratings and reviews, but I haven't heard anything about this movie. And after watching this, like you watch this for the first time, post there being a sequel that came out nearly a decade later, how do you feel about there being an Inside Out 2? Like, when this wrapped up, you know that there's a sequel. When I watched it the first time, I was like, well, that's a nice movie. It's done. And when I rewatched it, I was keenly thinking in my mind, there's a sequel to this. And then when it wrapped up, I was like, there's a sequel to this.
You gotta know what the puberty button does, Ryan.
Yeah, is that it? Like, it must be, but but how do you feel about just that idea of like, there's a sequel to this movie? Like, does that change or tarnish or alter the mood of this film?
To be honest, I don't really think that much, no. I mean, the character that they're all inside is like 11 or 12 at this point in the film. There's, she's got a life ahead of her, and, 11 or 12 might not necessarily be like the most influential time in her life. So, yeah, I think it's pretty open to there being another story, whether it requires or necessitates one or not.
I just wanted to know, because there is a finality. There's a joke at the end of like, oh, what could go wrong? What could happen? But there's like a sweet, cathartic ending to this that I kind of like repelled by the idea of a sequel. I just go, ugh. But not to such a degree like with Toy Story 4. I like Toy Story 4 well enough, but when I heard that they were making, and they're now making a fifth one, I just go, ugh. Because the third one wrapped it up great.
Yeah.
But also, like, there are some of these Pixar movies where it's like, I don't need a WALL-E 2. That's all I needed. Ratatouille, that's all I needed. Like that type of thing. Well, say a Toy Story, that's one where it's like, look, they could have done another one. And they did, like, when they did the sequel, I'm like, yeah, I can see why they're doing, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's just a cool idea. We like those characters. But with Inside Out, I don't know. It's just, it feels greedy. Like, we've had nearly a decade since then where Pixar has failed more than they've succeeded in many ways. And also, like, Disney's animation has stepped up. Like, their animation house, like, Zootopia, Moana was another one that's popular. Like, it gets to the point where you forget which one's a Pixar and which one's just a Disney now. There's Encanto exists. Like, is that a Pixar? I think it's a Disney. I can't remember. Like, they blur together. Luca. That's another one. Like, yeah, it's just like they've kind of both reached a certain point where it's like, oh God, I'm having a hard time distinguishing them. But while back in the day, you could.
Yeah.
You could always make a clear delineation of, because a Pixar movie would be like 5 steps ahead of whatever the Disney one was. But that said, of course, I recommend Inside Out. It's a great movie. It's a good time.
I do too. This was a good one. Thank you, Edgar.
Now, Bartek, it is your time to recommend a movie. What are you pitching our way?
Well, Ryan, we had such a good time with this kiddie film, but the next episode is the start of Spooky Month.
Is that right? We're at the start of Spooky Month, yeah.
Yeah. So, Ryan, put away the kiddie gloves. Let's do a Takashi Miike horror film.
Oh, no. Which one? He has a couple.
Yeah. It's one of the big ones that I've been meaning to check out from him. In fact, I think I might have wanted to do it my last foreign film recommendation, but I just forgot to look up if it was available. So very appropriate that it will fall under the beginning of Spooky Month. It is Gozu from 2003.
Gozu. I'm not familiar with this one.
I'm not too familiar with it either, but I mentioned when we were doing 13 Assassins that, last year I'd played through No More Heroes 3, and there are so many cutscenes in that where it's just the two Takashi Miike fans sitting down and shooting the shit about Takashi Miike, and they have this one segment where they're like, all right, what's the most fucked up film? What's the best film? And when they ask the question, like, what's the best film? They both agree, like, oh, Gozu, and they say nothing more about it. So I'm just curious, all right, why is it
I'm more aware of Audition and Ichi the Killer. I've seen Audition, I haven't seen Ichi the Killer, but those are like his fucked up movies I'm aware of.
They literally asked the question, like, what's the most fucked up? One of them said Audition, and the other one said something else. It was like Visitor Q or something.
Oh, yeah. But, so, Gozu.
Yeah. There was actually...
Not to get confused with Goza from Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it's Gozu. When I was looking up his filmography, I came across another film. It's like, oh, I should probably pick that one, but I just really want to see Gozu. And the reason why I thought that one would be more appropriate because it's a horror musical and it's the year of the musical, but...
You coward.
I want to see Gozu. I actually already downloaded it too. So.
Wow. I saw a post a little while ago that's like, Takashi Miike makes terrible movies, and it's like, excuse me, and they list like, some of his big ones, and then someone's like, yeah, the guy makes 2,000 films a year. Yeah, one of them's gonna stick. One of them's gonna stick. He is relentless as a filmmaker.
His filmography, just go on Wikipedia and look at it. It's like, Jesus Christ.
And he makes like every type of movie.
Yeah.
Didn't he do the live action Ace Attorney?
Yeah, he did Ace Attorney. He did this like 2015 like inspirational doctor story film I watched. He did some film called like Ninja Kids.
He's all over the place.
He's done like live action adaptations of a manga I read. He did like a JoJo live action film.
He's a wild character. But we will talk about that more next time on the podcast, and get ready for spooky month because we're about to get spooked. We're about to get eerie. We're about to get so creepy.
Yeah. And just to be in the spirit of, the year of the musical, that other film was called, it's from 2001, The Happiness of the Katakuris.
Maybe we'll do it next time. Maybe we'll still recommend it before the year's over.
Yeah, maybe it'll be your recommendation.
Maybe it'll be mine.
Yeah. The way that Spooky Month has fallen this year is that we both have two each, and there'll be one listening people's choice.
Oh, is that correct? I haven't done the maths on it, so I actually did, well, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to contact us or follow us, we are on social medias of Facebook and Twitter under Spit and Polish Presents, or you can email us at spitandpolished@gmail.com. All of this is included in the description of the episode, as well as other podcasting sites you can find us on. If you can, feel free to rate and review the podcast, share it about, and yes, recommend movies to us. Please recommend movies to us. We have a good list, but we could always use some more picks from you out there. And it doesn't matter what type, just because we have Spooky Month coming on, don't feel like you have to just recommend horror films. You can recommend a musical. It's a year of musicals, and we haven't done too many listener-picked musicals, have we? Have we done any? I can't recall.
Oh, my goodness,
we must have. I can't recall. Maybe Rachel, my wife, recommended Repo, the genetic opera. So we could use some more musicals. If you don't, someone may. And you don't want it to be like, well, I wanted to recommend such and such musical, but I never actually offered it. And then someone recommended a musical I hate, and then, I'll rue the day forever. No. Be the change you want to see in the world. Well, Bartek, thank you all for coming in today. Now, we have to clock off. Our shift of running the listening people's mind is done for the day. It is now time for Perversion to come in. Did you read the trivia? It was like they had like 50 emotions that they had in their mind of what they could use for this movie, and they cut it down to 5.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that movie where they're like, we include 50 emotions.
I read that apparently there was one that was like Gloom, that apparently a lot of fans are like, oh, we wanted to see Gloom.
It still didn't make it into the second film, I don't think. Gloom.
I think for the second film, they did add like a 6th one. I think it's like Nervousness or something.
They added a couple.
Can't remember.
Couple of other ones, I'm pretty sure.
I really don't know much about
I know that 2 of the voice actors couldn't be in the movie of the emotions, of fear and disgust. They were scheduling conflicts, so they just have different actors. So that's one of those things. And obviously Riley's a different voice actor in the sequel, even though the one who plays Riley in this is still acting. So it's like,
Well,
that kind of sucks.
She's grown up. Her voice is deeper.
Fun trivia fact. This will be what we end on. Since recording for these things can be spread across time, if you ever listen to voice actors of these movies, per se, they could do the voice work for years sometimes because the animation and the script changes. And so, like, Tom Hanks will be like, I did my voice for Woody over the course of, 2 years. I would just come in for a recording 1 week and then, won't hear back for 8 months and then blah, blah, blah. Well, the voice actress of Riley hit puberty. So in the back half of the movie, they had to teach her to, make her voice sound young and high again because her voice had noticeably changed. So that was a piece of the problem that they had to deal with in the production.
That was actually a trivia point for the film we did last week, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where apparently the production took so long that the guy that played Charlie went through puberty and changed his voice, and apparently you could really tell for his singing in the Grandpa Joe song.
Yes, so that's a funny thing, and yes, that is the way life goes. Until next time, listening people, remember to be kind to each other, or shitty, or miserable, or nice, or whatever. Maybe all of it, all of the above.
Ryan, since we opened the episode on it, how's your emotion now?
Now I am happy.